have a very unique perspective coming from, NASCOM, and then coming to, also banking, and before that with, with the group, with the Meena Ganesh team. I think you have a very unique perspective on this, right? So you've seen it go from the consumer to the, organizational side where you're doing with NASCOM, and then you're coming to banking. So what are your insights on, this responsible AI? One from, as a consumer, how can I know that, what is being offered to me is something I can trust? Especially when today, most of the companies that we are talking about, in this conversation as well, today, each of them have three antitrust hearings happening right now. Right now. And the most serious kind sometimes. These are, I think, great technologies. But I think one must also understand what's beyond that technology. Is it about really, what is the motive beyond building this technology many times? So many times, if you look at even the crypto industry, blockchain or the technology may be great for, coin or tokenization, etc. But a lot of them, probably their motivations were not great, and that's what causes the issues many times, right? It's not necessarily the technology alone. It's like the physicists working on the bomb, or anybody else. It could be used in two ways. So, your thoughts, Vipul, and across all this, yeah.
No, thank you so much. I think there have been some really interesting inputs both by Prabhu and Mohammed, and you as well, in terms of sharing how the Indian ecosystem is shaping up with this regards. But I would actually like to start with something what you had mentioned in the beginning, right? India is an old country, right? And rupee as such, or the mode of transaction has been significantly old for us. So it's not very difficult to accept the fact that probably exchange of rupee is as old as making a new language, because as soon as we had that, your buyer was asking how much, right? And that's how the transaction started. Very interestingly, and this is a fact that even I learned quite I think recently, about a week back or so, is that before dirham, UAE actually used to use rupee as a mode of transaction, and this was between 1957 to 1966.
Not too far away.
Yeah, and very interestingly, in the 1960s, before the oil boom, countries like UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman actually utilized Indian rupee as a designated currency. Right, so you have the older channels where there's so much of trade happening and there's exchange of currencies. Even in the 60s, you have rupee being used by different nations. Today again, there are talks of how rupee can come back again as a mode of transaction, for trade with different countries as well. So we have not been new to innovation when it comes to banking, when it comes to pushing the envelope in terms of how do you service your customers. And along with that, what India as a nation has benefited is that we do have a hunger for technology. We do have good resources. We have the know-how in terms of being able to enable it. Now, using those two as a perspective, I would say that AI in India, where it stands today, and again, thanks to the regulatory bodies, is at a very interesting stage. We are talking about responsible AI before we talk about practical AI. And that has been part of the conversation between most banks and ecosystems and fintechs and NBFCs, that if we are going to use AI to be able to create a product for the people, how do we make sure that it is done in a responsible manner? Now, this discussion started off way before we even started discussing, what could be the possibilities in terms of offering products. How would you be able to, use the data of the customers? How would you create the UX UI, and what sort of segment do we target first, whether it's a regular reg tech or insurance tech, personal loans, whatever that was. So it was very heartening to see that the conversation actually started off from there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Post that, what I would say is that AI in India is still at a very nascent stage. Most of the applications that I've seen are still in the ML space. And it is a little ironic that, the human intervention, that we talk about is still required here, because there was an example, about a year back when we wanted to digitalize P&L statements and balance sheets. Now, to a normal, user, you would say that that's one of the most basic formats that any organization would have, at the get-go and at the ready. But we realized that there was no tool available that could convert it into a digital format within 24 hours without manual intervention.
Because there are so many entries and differences in the entries and all that. Okay.
Absolutely, right? And different perspective of showing data by different organizations. So that is wherein the challenges lie in India. So a very quick small example that even something which is as standardized as a balance sheet or a P&L is not followed by everybody in its entirety, right? That becomes a challenge.
There's no
So
template. I mean, there may be a broad template, but there is
Yeah.
no, I would say, what do you call, authenticated template. This is what you got to submit. You can always have, variety. Yes.
Exactly. And that is wherein the challenge lies for a country like India. Because you have different regions, you have different, business patterns, you have different languages, you have, so many other complications that get added to it, right? So in that capacity, you do require a human intervention. And that's why till now, I've mostly seen a lot of ML-based companies creating solutions, building towards AI, but not really, doing significant work towards AI. Now, in terms of what Mohammed also said a little while earlier, is that when we're looking at AI and we're looking at cybersecurity, the sort of preconditions that we're building around it, the customer data that we're sharing, there are challenges in that space as well. We are talking very closely to regulatory bodies in terms of creating a framework or a sandbox that can be monitored by them, that can then be utilized for the larger audiences so that we can build on it. But we're still about a year or two away from that. The challenge being that we cannot democratize the data that banks have, and that's a very big challenge for us. And we cannot share that data with third-party vendors. And inherently, what all that also creates a problem is that we cannot validate how effective AI use case is, because that comes from the founder or from the organization, but there is no way that we can use similar data to be able to do that without actually breaking some of the rules. So that's one of the main pain points that we are suffering with. With regards to responsible AI, like I mentioned, it's very heartening to see that we are moving in steps when we are building solutions. For example, I was meeting this fintech last week, and when we were looking at building solutions, they were at least 4 steps ahead of us in terms of coding compliance, than we did as a bank. And that's great to see, because it's ultimately our money at the end of the day. Customers are being taken into account for, and it's with that sentiment that the solutions are being built. And what I've seen as a trend, thanks to events like GFF recently and multiple other forums where the success story of fintech in India is being showcased, is that when you're building that particular solution and if it's acceptable in India, if it works across so many challenges, geographies, people, languages, cultures, right? It's ready for the world. I mean, you can actually pick up something from here.
And battle tested. It's not just ready for the world. It is like battle tested. So yeah, great point.
Exactly.
India is
Exactly.
a testing ground for